D.A. Prasanna, Professor Neeta Inamdar, Professor Parul Pandyadhar, who is the editor of the book we are discussing today, Professor Suchandra Ghosh, Ms. Madhu Nataraj of the Natya STEM Dance Company. Dear friends, it gives me great pleasure to be here today at the release of an important work of impressive scholarship, one that explores the many journeys of the Ramayana across the southern reaches of our subcontinent and in the transoceanic space beyond the Bay of Bengal, in Myanmar, Malaysia, Thailand, and beyond. This book, The Multivalence of an Epic, retelling the Ramayana in South India and Southeast Asia, is a record and an interpretation of history encapsulated through inscriptions, trading contacts, cultural diplomacy, and political give and take. It divulges fascinating insights that are in many ways a retelling of our most sacred beliefs, beliefs held in the innermost sanctum of the soul. The realization that this consciousness is shared across the seas, albeit in different forms of interpretation, brings home to one that a temporal world's dialogue with the spiritual transcends linear boundaries and enshrines a common humanity. This is a study, therefore, that demonstrates not only the power of an Indian cultural idiom, but also the appeal and the lure of our civilizational ethos, how our ancient forebears acted east, foreshadowing the policies formulated by our mandarins today. In the multivalence of the Ramayana and its many manifestations, we see soft power attaining the pinnacle of its reach and influence and becoming the vector for a political and strategic reach that was truly epic. It is this volume's engagement, as it says, and I quote, with the inherent plurality, diversity, and adaptability of the epic, unquote, the Ramayana, quote, in changing contexts and with shifting norms, tastes, traditions, and ideologies, unquote, in idioms that are classical and folk, temples and palaces, to theatres and bylanes in cities and villages that make this study so special and striking. In these ways, the various retellings of the Ramayana become animated renderings, voiceovers that are not lost in translation, that demolish racial, linguistic, and class divides, emphasizing a richness and a profundity of devotion that will not be stifled or stilled. The mind is transfixed by these diverse images of all the central characters of the epic, revealing, as the book states, diverse priorities, motivations, proclivities, and selective adaptations, moving across a many-splendored spectrum that speaks of a protean Ramayana, how the ways of perceiving the epic are many. Yet, through this divergence, the implicit underlying core is one of cultural convergence, a pan-Asian multivalence, as if each dancer, each sculpture, each representation, regardless of the location, are all branches of a living, speaking tree tied to similar myths of origin, many voices united in harmonious polyphony. The Ramayana and the reverence and fascination in which the epic is held needs hardly to be explained to all of you. Those of you who are old enough will recall the televising of the epic by Doordarshan TV in the 1980s and the worshipful adulation the serializing of the epic received. I recall visiting the remote tribal village of Taksing in Arunachal Pradesh on the Indo-Tibetan border in 1989 on a morning when the latest episode of the Ramayana was being aired. The village was deserted when our helicopter landed. We were told that every single resident who was otherwise isolated from the world beyond was gathered before the sole television set in the village watching the Ramayana. It is this essence of connectivity, uniting people across ethnicities and lived experience, that is also expressed so magically in many communities of the Indian diaspora, and here I speak particularly of the Caribbean. The Ramayana, as the name of the epic suggests, is about journeys, odysseys, and similar epics involving the stretches to which the endurance and the solidity of character of their heroes are tested come to mind. There is yet another set of journeys that is also recalled, those of indentured labor from India crossing the high seas to various destinations across the Indian Ocean and stretching into the Caribbean. I think of the way memory was enshrined in the minds of those who undertook these journeys, memory that outlasts the passage of generations. This is what drew me to Derek Walcott's Nobel lecture, which is one of the most evocative renderings of the purpose of memory and how its survival is so vital to ensure the living nature of sacred traditions that go beyond concepts of imaginary homelands. The performance of the Ram Leela that Walcott witnessed and writes about was a rendition of one of the greatest epics in the world performed, and I quote, not with that desperate resignation of preserving a culture, but with an openness of belief that was as steady as the wind bending the cane lances of the Caroni plain, unquote. The players and the young actors who Walcott saw personified elation, a delight of conviction, not of a loss of identity or a homeland. I quote, they believed in what they were playing, in the sacredness of the text, the validity of India, unquote. I was taken with Walcott's likening of this love and longing personified in the performance to a broken vase that is reassembled and where the attachment to that broken, restored vase is stronger than that love which took its symmetry for granted when it was whole, unquote. This assembling of broken pieces that, I quote again, contain more pain than their original sculpture, those icons and sacred vessels taken for granted in their ancestral places, unquote, broken off from the original continent, is what makes the experience so unique. When one witnesses the performances of the Ramayana in Southeast Asia, too, I recall how Walcott put it in the context of the Caribbean, that even though the original language dissolves from the exhaustion of distance, like fog trying to cross an ocean, these are his words, the process of finding new metaphors becomes the assembling by a poet of nouns from necessity. Through the depiction of the Ramayana, Walcott's Caribbean Indian performers hear once again that inner Asia of the soul, a rekindling of that collective memory of an entire race whose genealogies may or may not originate from the subcontinent, just as in one of the young performers dressed as a warrior who flies his bamboo arrow over the cane fields of that Caribbean village with unbounded delight. I could sense that same magic while witnessing a performance of the Ramayana at Borobudur in Indonesia a few years ago. The Ramayana is thus a mirror of the Indian soul, but also of a universal soul. And as this new book explains, further tellings of the epic will continue to be created, together with new ways of perceiving it. It can never be monolithic or exclusive in its interpretation. The very definition of epic, the word epic, to me, suggests the limitless scope of human endeavor, of the distant polarities to which the body and spirit can aspire in reaching the pinnacles of endurance and exploration in order to seek the meaning of existence. The Ramayana and its many retellings expresses that, its appeal resting in the crossing of barriers of nationality and faith, class and creed, charting new pathways into the unknown and the unexplored. It thus belongs to the family of every man and woman, a celestial song divine. Thank you once again. And ladies and gentlemen, I congratulate the Professor D.S. Achyutarao Endowment for making this wonderful book possible and bringing it to a wide audience. It gives me great pleasure now to release the multivalence of an epic retelling the Ramayana in South India and Southeast Asia, edited by Parul Pandyadhar. Ladies and gentlemen, the book.